Next up on the broadcast, Senator Chris Elliott of Fairhope is back in studio with us. Senator, welcome back to Capitol Journal.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to see you as always.
Yes, sir.
Senator, I want to begin with what is a hot potato topic down in your district right now, and that's a proposed toll for a new bridge in Bayway, I-10 bridge in Bayway. This is great for that area. The project is. The problem is commuters, and I think you share their concern, feel that they would bear an undue portion of the cost of this with this up to $6, I think, one-way toll that's been proposed.
It is concerning, and it's especially concerning, again, as you correctly mentioned, for our commuters, the folks that live in Baldwin County and drive to Mobile County for work, or vice versa. We have a lot of folks from Mobile County that come to Baldwin County for work, and that's just how we've grown up, and that's how our economy has grown up back and forth across the Bayway. My concern is that the proposed $6 toll from ALDOT is going to put an incredible burden on those commuters. If you do the simple math, we're talking about $2,500 a year per vehicle per family to go back and forth, and $5,000 a year if you've got mom and dad both commuting, which I think is simply untenable. It's more than the entire amount of state and local taxes the average Alabamian pays, the average Baldwin Countyan pays, and it's something that we're going to have to work on reducing. Now, as you correctly point out, the project's needed though, and the question is, at the end of the day, like so many other challenges that we face, how do we pay for it and how do we make it work? So I'm working on some different solutions to that, along with ALDOT and the governor's office, to try to make this something that is reasonable and palatable for our local commuters. You
have written ALDOT, have you not, and expressed some of these concerns to them directly. Have they responded? Have you heard from them?
They absolutely have, and I have a very good working relationship with Director Cooper and a lot of his staff. They were in Baldwin County, as a matter of fact, talking about this issue with us again, and I feel that they are really taking some of the concerns to heart. It's really easy to look at toll studies. It's easy to look at the numbers and figure out what do we have to have in order to make this project work. The hard part is when it really starts to hit people in their pockets. That's where the rubber meets the road, if you'll forgive the analogy, and where we have to make sure we've got something that's reasonable and palatable. And I think that's what we're working towards now.
And they feel, obviously, that they can't do this project without this toll to help pay for it.
Well, the biggest and most complicated part of this project is there's very little federal funding. There's almost no federal funding, as a matter of fact, in this project. I will be in Washington next week making a final argument for an infra grant from USDOT. That grant, currently, the ask for that grant is $150 million. Out of a $2.1 billion project. It's 7% of the total project cost. ALDOT previously has applied for a $500 million grant and been turned down, a $250 million grant and been turned down, because the pot at ALDOT, or at USDOT, is so small. It's only about $800 million to $1.3 billion for the entire country. So there's very little federal money. My point is, to the folks that are detractors of the toll, the folks that say no toll, is really simple. If we build this project and there's no toll on it, then that entire burden falls on the taxpayers of Alabama. I want to make sure we shift a good portion of the burden to the folks that are actually using that. 60% of the traffic on this bridge in Bayway comes from Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Florida. I want them to share in the burden of that, just as they would if there was federal funding for this project. And having a toll on the project allows those folks from Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Florida to help us pay for this project. Now, in the mix, we've got to make sure we reduce the toll or eliminate the toll for our local users.
Is that easier said than done?
Sure. There's no question about it. I mean, this is a huge project, a project that's been contemplated for decades, that has outlived most elected officials and likely will outlive me. But we know that the traffic volume on that road is going to be completely untenable, that it's going to adversely affect commerce. It already is, but it's going to just bring commerce to a grinding halt in the next 10 to 15 years. And we have to be proactive and make sure we find a solution to get this project done. So in combination with the governor's office, calling for a reasonable toll on this project, Director Cooper and ALDOT working towards that end in response to my letter and other concerns, and frankly, I think some legislation that will be introduced next session that will help with this for our local users. I think we've got a way to make this palatable.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. if I'm hearing you right, what you're proposing here, and others like you, is that maybe local commuters not pay as big a toll as those out-of-state commuters who use it.
Absolutely.
Is that easy to accomplish?
Well, the Federal Highway Administration and USDOT have some restrictions on whether or not you can treat people differently based on where they live. What you can do is look at frequent user discounts, and that is what we're going to have to focus on, is the frequent user discounts. The commuters that are coming through on a regular basis, that they get a flat rate or they get a very decreased toll, or again, if I can work through some legislation, an elimination of a toll on the state side. And I think that if we can do that, that this project will become much more palatable for the folks in my district.
Has legislation like that been attempted before, eliminating the toll for local commuters?
Well, we don't have any public toll facilities really in Alabama. You know, there are a few scattered around, but the state toll authority has never really been used before in the way that it's going to be used. We just passed some legislation that the governor did a signing for here recently that updates that toll authority legislation that has been on the books for years and years and years, modernizes it, and also provides a tax break for the contractor's gross receipts tax on projects such as this. Now that tax is usually around 5% on a $2 billion project. That's $100 million that in savings that could be passed on, and I hope will be passed on to the commuter.
Concerning your legislation, again, this authority is called the Toll Road, Bridge, and Tunnel Authority. It's been in existence for a number of years, but it's never really been utilized. And what your legislation says is that let's start utilizing it.
Well, it's going to be utilized, and when we realized that this is where ALDOT was headed, we knew we needed to update the legislation, and we needed to make sure that we did everything we could to make it as efficient as possible, so that if a toll was necessary, and ALDOT seems to think, and I think is probably correct in saying, you know, a toll is necessary because of the lack of federal funding, then we do everything we can to drive the price down as much as we can to make sure that the cost to the folks in Alabama is as low as possible. And that toll authority legislation, while it is probably going to be rolled out for the first time in coastal Alabama, could be used in other parts of the state as well, which is why I think it ultimately passed both houses and had the governor's signature on it, because the next time it gets used, it's going to be in Birmingham, or it's going to be in Huntsville, between Huntsville and Decatur, or some other area like that.
In pushing this legislation this year, have you had to be careful in your support of it? Has there been misunderstanding about what you were trying to do, given the controversial nature of this proposed toll project?
Oh, sure, no question. I mean, there are folks that say, "Hey, you have enabled this project to be tolled," and the answer to that is, of course not. This project was going to be tolled. This project was going to be tolled using the legislation that's been on the books for years and years. My goal in this legislation was to make it efficient and to make sure that the cost to the contractor was as low as possible, so that the cost to the consumer, to my constituents, was as low as possible, and to the rest of Alabamians. And that was the goal of the legislation, and we've succeeded with that.
Now, to those who live outside of the Mobile area, I'm wondering what effect this has on me. It really has a ripple effect across the state, does it not?
Oh, no question. I mean, straddling this bridge is the Port of Mobile, right? We have major industries on both sides of Mobile Bay that are impacted by this road and this throughway. And I think that, you know, again, failing this project, you're going to see major economic slowdowns in coastal Alabama when we start talking about the aerospace industry and Airbus, when we start talking about shipping, when we start talking about advanced manufacturing on both sides of the bay. You know, every A320 and A320neo engine that is put on an Airbus in Mobile is first potted in Foley and comes across that bridge. And we will continue to see additional secondary and tertiary suppliers to Airbus and other aerospace industries that will need to use that roadway. And failing getting this project across the line is really just not an option.
State and federal lawmakers have gotten an earful about this, apparently, from constituents down there. Congressman Bradley Byrne recently said that it was really out of his hands now, that he had done, you know, he's only limited in what he can do. Is this really up to the state as you see it?
Well, unfortunately, it seems clear that there is a lack of federal infrastructure funding for projects such as this. You know, the president talks about a $2 trillion infrastructure package. The problem is that $2 trillion really includes counting projects like this, P3 projects, public-private partnership projects. is part of that $2 trillion. So what we're seeing is maybe, there's not adequate federal funding. I don't think Congressman Byrne has the ability to go achieve that. Senator Shelby, the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, doesn't have the ability to squeeze $2 billion out of a turnip, if you will. The money's just not there from the federal level. Do I wish it was? Heck yeah, I wish it was there. And I have been asking, is there a way to make that happen on the federal level for some time? So I'll let Congressman Byrne and Senator Shelby and Senator Jones talk about the federal funding or lack of federal funding, but it is clear from where I sit, and I think from where the governor sits, that there's not significant federal money. And that means that the state is left with two options. One, figure out how to do it, or two, let the problem fester, do nothing, and find ourselves in a world of hurt 10 or 15 years down the road.
And again, back to the legislation you said will probably be coming next year concerning this matter. Give us a brief overview again of what that might entail.
Well, we're looking at a number of different ways to try to work around what FHWA and the feds are saying about decreasing tolls on locals. And I think there are a number of creative ways to do that. We may have to save that for another taping, though.
This stays in the headlines down in South Alabama almost daily. It's a tense issue for a lot of people. I'm sure you hear from constituents almost daily about this.
Well, we do. There's no question about it. And I mentioned some of the numbers at the top of our conversation about just how much money this is going to mean to the average commuter. I mean, that's more than they pay in state taxes and local taxes right now. We talk about tax increases. What's been proposed early on is almost a doubling, not a 20% increase, not a 40%, but 100% increase or more on what folks are paying. And that's a non-starter for me. It's been a non-starter since I first sent that letter early on. I've been following this project from the very beginning. We knew that there were going to have to be some creative financing methods in order to make this work, but we've got to find something that's reasonable. And at the end of the day, I will say, if it is too expensive and if it's too much of a burden on local commuters and my constituents, this project will lose my support, and I'll advocate for a no build. I want to make sure we explore every single option we can. I want to look at every way to get to yes and get it done. But if at the end of the day the deal's not sufficient, then I have no problem pulling my support from it.
Senator, let's